So it's been a while since I've done one of my RPG recommendation videos, and because this is November, the start of November, which is when KimuraCon would have been this year, had we not been in the middle of a global pandemic, let's, well, do some anime-related videos here, and do one of my RPG recommendations videos, because a whole bunch of shows have come out since the last one of these I did, and a whole bunch of new recommendations to put forward. So, again, for those of you just coming into the channel, by the way, quick explanation. In the past, I've done a couple review videos on tabletop RPGs based on other fandoms. You provide gateways to the hobby based on other works you like, mainly video games and Japanese animation. These recommendations have included various versions of Dungeons & Dragons, but have not been exclusive to D&D. So, basically, like, for example, for my first one of these videos, which I did for recommendations based on video games, for Dark Souls, I recommended some of the games in the what's called the Old School Renaissance. And for my first of the anime videos, I gave as a recommendation for Made in Abyss, I gave the role-playing game Dungeon Crawl Classics, which is a D&D derivative, but falls more into the weird fantasy side of things, which is where Made in Abyss falls. Now, it's been a long time since my last video on the topic. We've had a bunch of shows since then that have come out, so time to return to this discussion. As with all my previous videos, these recommendations are not going to be one-to-one comparisons. This is not a situation where you can come in to pick up the rulebook and just using the rules as written, you can just run these series. I am pitching these games as thematic similarities to various series. If you want to match the more out there stuff from these shows, you are going to need to do some house ruling and crafting of game material on your own. What I'm looking for for my recommendations is game systems where thematically and to a certain degree mechanically there's something close to what is going on with those shows and the world of those shows. And you can pick it up. The players go, oh, this is going to have certain common elements with this series, and then you can go from there. And if you decide over the course of the campaign or for a future campaign to go something a little closer to this original series, once you feel more comfortable with the rules, you can then go, all right, now I'm making up rules for whatever. With that in mind, well, again, it's time for another 6 recommendations of tabletop role-playing games for fans of anime. If you like No Guns Life, you'll like Cyberpunk 2020 and likely Cyberpunk Red as well. What fuels this recommendation is 4 words: high tech, low life. Lots of other Cyberpunk anime, like Ghost in the Shell, which is one of the works that the gamebook includes as a recommendation, has cybernetic augmentation and even full body conversions being clean, glitzy affairs. No Guns Life is much more gritty than that. Indeed, the show spends almost all its time in the less well-off parts of towns, with indeed one of the key members of the supporting cast literally being a street doc. While this setting doesn't have the variety of corporations to do jobs with that Cyberpunk 2020 has, the setting fits nicely into the idea of the players being normal people on the street, whether normal or physically normal, baseline, or extended from No Guns Life, and having to deal with the things that come with that, with having either been augmented and also dealing with the corporations that, like Buren, who are controlling the access to cybernetic augmentation, as well as terrorist groups like Spitsbergen, who are out to attack those who get augmentation. All of that said, Cyberpunk 2020, and presumably the final version of Cyberpunk Red as well, can be kind of lethal. So you may want to keep that under advisement when running the game. Now, in No Guns Life, less augmented people do tend to go down fairly quickly. I mean, like, the regular humans who are otherwise body armored and that sort of stuff, once they get hit, they can go down pretty fast, but it's just a matter of hitting them is the situation there, is how I'd put it. It's not like in Shadowrun, for example, where characters can be a bit more of a bullet sponge. So you may want to keep this under advisement when running the game. Now, there is a lighter, somewhat more cinematic version of the interlock rules that was put out by Artel Zorian called Fusion. This is what they used in their Bubblegum Crisis and Armored Trooper Votom's games. So, you may want to consider using the conversion guidelines, so they did put out conversion guidelines from interlock to Fusion, to use Cyberpunk 2020 gear in combination with the Fusion rules. Additionally, and this is a slight thematic spoiler for Season 2 of No Gun's Life, you may consider having a hybrid of mechanical and role-playing way for players to recover humanity points. Without getting into the weeds and giving away any plot-specific points, one of the big thematic elements of Season 2 of No Gun's Life is Juzo coming to terms with what happened to him during the war, and dealing with his own loss of humanity that came with his conversion to being a gun slave. Season 1 was all world building and some more episodic narrative stuff. Season 2 is much more nitty-gritty, character-focused stuff, particularly focused on Juzo and Mary and a couple other members of the supporting cast. So, without getting too much into it, I will say that based on his actions in this storyline, I could reasonably rule that Juzo, by the end of the season, had probably recovered a humanity point or two based on the actions and roleplay that he would have done. So that is something to keep in mind. Because as it stands, Cyberpunk 2020, Cyberpunk Red isn't out yet. The full rules aren't out yet, so I can't speak for the final version of the Cyberpunk Red rules as of this recording. Cyberpunk Red took a stance for how the humanity system works that is probably closer to something, in terms of for anime or inspirations, for something close like AD Police, the original AD Police OVAs back in the day, where you had the stories like The Man Who Bites His Tongue, where the title character is so heavily cybernetically augmented that the character has to, this is going to sound super emo, and it is, has to bite their own tongue in order to feel. So, when it comes to, if you're adapting Cyberpunk 2020 and Cyberpunk Red to something more thematically in tune with No Gun's Life, having a way to recover humanity is, I think, an important way to make that narrative and thematic link. Just be reasonable and give thoughts about how you're going to do this and how the players execute it. Like, if a player is trying to recover humanity for this character, is this because they have the deliberate intention further down the road to undergo further cybernetic augmentations, in which case maybe less so, or perhaps blunt the amount of humanity they're recovering? Whereas this character, as they stand now, is not intending to be augmented any more than they already are. Any further augmentations are going to be due to accidents of circumstance as opposed to deliberate choice, i.e., a character may have to replace a limb because they lost a limb, not because they want to replace their limb with chrome. That is a deliberate choice. That sort of thing. So, something to keep in mind. If you like Bodacious Space Pirates, consider trying out Traveler. Now, the setting of Bodacious Space Pirates feels very much like it fit the tone of a more non-standard Traveler campaign. The Traveler campaign is probably closer to Firefly or Cowboy Bebop with some FTL instead of seeing a single solar system. However, the framework of the Traveler rules could also very easily work with the campaign along the lines of Bodacious Space Pirates, with the party as a crew of a privateer who serves as a unofficial military of a star system or star cluster, while doing side gigs running cargo, doing exploration, or engaging in insurance fraud performances to make money. And then with larger geopolitics, or stellar politics, interstellar politics, coming in and various other factors as the campaign goes on. As far as fudging things and ruling things go, FTL and Traveler, if you watch the extensive series of videos from Seth Skorkowski breaking down the Mongoose Traveler 2nd Edition rules, generally takes about 1 week each way when traveling between systems, no matter what. And without a lot of FTL communications, which is something that's also common to Bodacious Space Pirates. So, that's something that you might want to consider fudging to a degree, or you want to assume that Sea of the Morning Star is actually a relatively small cluster, and the distances are such that it's not too much of a hassle for the Bentenmaru to go out, do a job, and come back in time for Marika to go back to school. So, travel time, that's something they can reasonably fudge by the GM if they feel so inclined. Again, Seth Skorkowski has a very, very thorough rundown of how the current edition of Traveler, published by Mongoose Games, works, and the full playlist on that, I will have a link in the show notes to that full playlist. I recommend you check it out. It's a lot of viewing, but it's a really good primer of how the game system works before you pick it up. If you like Outlaw Star, consider trying out Starfinder. The more fantastic elements of the Outlaw Star setting, like overt magic, not just like psychic powers, but like actual Taoist magic and grappler ships, don't fit as well with Traveler, though the thematic elements of finding a ship, a crew, a job, and keeping flying does fit. Same with, to a certain degree, exploring lost ruins in search of treasure. However, Starfinder fits in those magical elements much better, while still keeping with those other themes. And so thus, we have our obligatory D&D or D&D adjacent game for the episode this time. Starfinder is something of a precursor of the game system used for Cyberpunk 2nd Edition, except in space, with some considerable mechanical overhauls to go with that. Now, there's plenty of rules for alien races with the rules in the core book, and additionally, it falls under the Pathfinder OGL, so there's also the Pathfinder SRD Wiki, which includes a whole bunch of third-party products and other items and character races and that sort of thing in there. As it is, like with what's in the book, you should be able to do about 4/5 of the crew of the Outlaw Star, with Malfina basically being an android, or the android race, and Jean, Jim, and Suzuka all being humans. I mean, even the mechanic class, like a big chunk of its class abilities fit with a lot of the stuff that Jim has going on with his link to Gilliam and the Outlaw Star. The only character who doesn't have a real rules equivalent race-wise is the Katarl, so as a GM, you're going to need to figure out how they work mechanically. Also, there's nothing quite in the core rules like Jean's caster gun. But again, Starfinder is Pathfinder adjacent, which means there's magic, which means I can come up with a pretty clear fix for that. The short version of this ruling, of my GM advice for the game, is this. We know from the show that different caster shells contain different levels of powerful magic. So caster shells, or have them, work something like scrolls from Pathfinder, with the catch being that caster shells can only hold a particular level of magic inside them. A level 1 shell can only contain level 1 shells, and a level 5 shell contain level 5 spells. Nothing higher, nothing lower. The advantage of a caster gun is that you can fire spells with the touch range at range to be up close. For spells that require and are based off an area of effect, wherever the shell goes off, maybe you can, as a timed fuse, you can set off or something like that, or have it go off when it hits a particular target. Where the blast of the spell centers is where the shell hits, or what have you. Now, a shell can be reloaded by having a spell of the same level cast into it. Now, what that means to you as a GM is that if you put a caster gun into your campaign as an item that the players can get in an adventure, what you can do is seed the gun with a bunch of shells, some with spell levels that the characters can cast, and this is the key part, others with spells that are too high level for the characters to cast. But when you're identifying magic items for having your spellcaster or whatever do so, let them know what spells are in those shells and what the spell levels of the shells are. So what this does for you as a GM is it creates a hook for the players. Since these shells can be reloaded, then the party has an incentive to search for a higher level spellcaster who can reload those shells. And in turn, that NPC can serve as a patron to the party. Because like part of the thing with Outlaw Star is that while Jean and the crew, a lot of the jobs they find are proactive jobs, like the race, or jobs that blunder into their lap. They also just as often get jobs as commissions from patrons, like the arms dealer, for example, to give them other things to do or to help push the storyline further along. Additionally, if a particular higher level spell, which can be used in shell form, is needed for a particular goal, then seeking out that shell can serve as another adventure hook. Indeed, it was in an episode of the show when Jean goes to get to the special caster shelves during the Hot Springs episode, which is a plot important beat since those come up at the series finale. Also, Starfinder does not have rules for grappler ship combat. I can't really help you there. That don't fit with the with how I can present this on the in video format. So DMs, this is something you have to figure out on your own, or alternatively, rule that you are in an alternative universe where grappler ships never quite caught on. Certainly your players, even the ones who like Outlaw Star, may go, honestly, grappler ships, maybe not that practical, actually. We're fine with not having them. If you like Higurashi no Koro ni, you may also like the tabletop games Fear Itself and Trail of Cthulhu. Now, part of the plot of the Higurashi games and the narratives of the anime series is based around solving the mystery of the town of Hinamizawa, what is causing it to become somewhat stuck in time. And sort of. It's complicated. And what is causing the townfolk to kill themselves and each other. Fear Itself and Trail of Cthulhu are both based on the Gumshoe system, which was created by Robin D. Laws to deal with some of the issues that come up with trying to run mystery games in a conventional role-playing game system, where a missed skill roll can lead to a missed clue that can lead to players running down a dead end and the game coming to a stop and people not having fun. The Gumshoe system is instead based around drawing conclusions from those clues instead of just finding them, and this is where the double recommendation comes in. The game Fear Itself is a spin-off of another RPG, Night's Dark Agents, where Fear Itself is about common people facing off against the horrors that the supernatural spies of Night's Dark Agents are going up against. That fits very nicely with the story in Higurashi, and also for that matter Umineko, where the protagonists are generally high school students instead of the more superpowered beings from other games. So it sort of fits because if not to spoil too much for Higurashi, there are people with somewhat supernatural abilities in protagonist roles, without giving too much away if you're relatively fresh coming to Higurashi. On the other hand, Trail of Cthulhu is taking the Gumshoe formula and applying that to the concept of Call of Cthulhu, with the characters trying to hold on to their sanity while investigating cosmic horrors, and not necessarily those in the form of tentacle monstrosities either, which is also another concept that fits in very nicely with Higurashi. If you're taking the tack of the madness that sets in on people isn't parasites, it's something else, something more supernatural. It all really depends on what type of horror you prefer in Higurashi and what interpretation of what's going on that you like. Either one will work. I'd recommend giving either one a peruse to see what works for you. If you like JoJo's Bizarre Adventures Season 1, you may like Pulp Cthulhu. I'm putting a big asterisk here. This recommendation does not include any arcs of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure after the introduction of stands. As far as the Call of Cthulhu system is concerned, once stands are involved, all bets are off, and indeed you may be better off with another system. That said, the Pulp Cthulhu add-on to the Call of Cthulhu tabletop game, 7th edition, takes the stance of, what if you saw cosmic horrors beyond imagination, and then instead of being immediately driven mad, or getting killed, or driven mad and killed, you shot the crap out of them. Like the whole bit from Battle Tendency where Joseph Joestar opens fire on a pillar vampire with a Tommy gun at the end of an episode, while the opening guitar piece from Roundabout plays. That would totally fit in the Pulp Cthulhu campaign. No problem. Same with the bit with it getting up afterwards and Joseph leading on a chase through New York at the start of the next episode, with him then killing it in the sunlight on the Brooklyn Bridge. Again, fits perfectly in there. No problem. Don't need to change a thing. Where you're gonna need to do some house ruling for adapting Pulp Cthulhu to Um, well, Season 1 of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, particularly Battle Tendency and Phantom Blood, is when it comes to hand-to-hand combat. As it stands, no pun intended, in the rules, there really isn't a way to do a Hamon Master, in the sense of a person who has supernatural martial arts abilities and above and beyond that of ordinary people. As fun as it would be to take on a Shoggoth with a martial arts technique based on breathing. So GMs, this is something that you're going to either need to figure out on your own how to adapt, or you can just as reasonably go into the campaign with the assumption that you're not playing Hammond Masters and you're not running into them either. You are more operatives for, say, Speedwagon Industries or the Speedwagon Foundation. And that is your role in the campaign. Is you're not adjacent to you're only adjacent to the Joestar family in the sense that you are adjacent to Speedwagon. And Speedwagon never learns Hammond. And that's okay. But it's something where when you come into the campaign, your players are going to have to come to the table knowing, yes, I realize we're doing a JoJo's Bizarre Adventure inspired campaign. Don't expect to be going while using Hamon to beat up a pillar vampire. If you like Battle Angel Alita Last Order, you'll like Eclipse Phase. This is a slight cheat because Alita Last Order has yet to receive an anime adaptation and may never get one, but that's okay. The manga's still there, it's still available, it's in print, it's available physically and digitally, and it is open for recommendations. So the world of Battle Angel Alita Last Order is dangerous, harsh, and much more explicitly transhumanist than the setting on Earth in the original Battle Angel Alita series. Consequently, once you step into the territory of Last Order, conventional cyberpunk RPGs, which is what your normal recommendation would be, no longer quite work. Instead, you need a game system that is also more transhumanist. Hence, the recommendation for Eclipse Phase. Now, so as far as adapting Eclipse Phase goes, this is a case of moderating expectations. Eclipse Phase is not as particularly gonzo as Last Order, at least at the levels you're likely going to be playing. You're not going to be throwing around the abilities that are getting shown off inside the Zenith of Things tournament. However, considering the abilities in the Zot are things that kill people in the audience regularly throughout the tournament to show how expectedly dangerous they are and how nuts life is getting, that is actually probably okay. And as it is, part of the thing with Panzerkunst is it's a rare martial art. When Alita runs into Alita being a Kunstler and then running into other Kunstlers is a very big deal. And similarly with the Imaginos body and how it evolves and changes over the course of the Zot, same thing. However, if that level of spectacle is the direction you want to go, that is going to take you a lot more work as a GM to go, okay, we want to hit a power level where someone can just punch through an entire space station from one end to another in just one punch. But again, that is up to you. The other elements of it, with re-sleeving bodies and with what happens with the other Alitas, I guess is how I'd put it, that were created by Desdi Nova, or Desdi Nova himself and the multiple Novas going around, and various other elements related to the larger setting and certain degrees of how transhumanism works out inside the setting of Battle Angel Alita Last Order. All of that works really great for Eclipse Phase. Again, it's just a matter of managing player expectations in terms of you're not of perhaps going, okay, with this system, you are not going to achieve enlightenment and become a cyber kung fu Buddha. That's not me making, if you haven't read Last Order, that's not me making a comedic over-exaggeration for effect. We'll just leave it at that. Now, links to where you get all the games that I have mentioned are at Drive-Thru RPG, or where you can get them at Drive-Thru RPG, will be in the show notes, and buying anything through the Drive-Thru RPG links will help support the show. That's anything. Doesn't have to be the games I link to. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the show, please like and subscribe. And also consider backing my Patreon. Patreon backers get episodes up to 1 week early of this show and any future Let's Plays. Also, please consider backing my Ko-fi. Toss me a few bucks, also helps support the show, and it's not a monthly obligation or anything like that.